About Booker T. Washington's life, legacy, and achievements that has inspired so many over the years, and yet continues to be disputed by some others today. Could it be that Washington understood that freedom, real freedom, is personal, not political? That it is about how individuals, regardless of circumstances, will choose to live their lives? He chose to live a constructive, productive life of service to others, and without bitterness or resentment. Washington chose values to live his life by that became a source of inspiration to others, but as importantly, gave strength and power to his own character. He became a famous educator, speaker, activist, leader, thinker, and a builder of character. He advised 3 U.S. presidents, McKinley, Roosevelt, and Taft. Harvard and Dartmouth even awarded him honorary degrees. And to have accomplished so much, you'd think he was born rich and privileged. But he was born a slave on a small tobacco farm in Virginia, lived on scraps for the first 9 years of his life in this old dirt-floor, one-room cabin with his mother and brother. The only thing he owned was a single name, Booker. Booker was 9 when freedom came so that he and his family could leave Hales Ford to join his stepfather in Malden, now part of West Virginia. It had become legal for blacks to attend school, and Booker was eager to do so, but his stepfather told him he'd have to work like everyone else. So Booker organized his time to accomplish both. He would get up at 4 in the morning from this very house, work at a salt mine until 9, leave for school, then return to work at the mine from 2 till 9, a 12-hour workday plus school. This commitment paid off 3 years later when he heard about a school for Negroes back in Virginia run by a Civil War general named Samuel Armstrong. With his mother's blessing, he left for Hampton Institute, but he only had enough money to ride halfway, so he walked the rest of the way over 200 miles on foot and alone. He was 12, but very determined. He worked his way through Hampton as a janitor, graduated with honors, and returned to Malden, where he started a day school, a night school, and a debating society. He attended a Baptist seminary in Washington, then returned to Hampton to teach. One day, Armstrong received a wire from Alabama asking him to recommend a white principal for a Negro normal school, a teacher's college, but he recommended Booker T instead. They wired back, "He'll do, send him," and Washington was on his way to Tuskegee. Imagine a 25-year-old Washington arriving to find nothing. No buildings, land, teachers, or students. In fact, Washington was their second attempt for a principal. The first, a white, came and promptly quit. But Washington was no quitter. He found former slaves to live with, then went around the countryside to spread word of his school. And when he found a dilapidated one-room church with a leaky roof, he announced that July 4th, a day of special significance, would be opening day. And so he opened, with 30 students. Within a year, he had borrowed $200 from Hampton's treasurer to buy an abandoned 100-acre farm and built Tuskegee's first permanent building. It was designed by instructors and built by students. This was Washington's innovative, economical, and practical method to grow Tuskegee. By 1915, over 100 of some 200 buildings on campus had been built by students. Moreover, at the time of his death in 1915, he had grown the Tuskegee campus to 5,000 acres and had built an endowment of $1.5 million, equivalent to $35 to $40 million today. Did you catch that? Young men and women who had lived like this learned skills to build hundreds of buildings like this. But to teach those skills, Washington had to overcome the mentality of the slave that said freedom means being free from doing hard work. He taught that hard work was honorable, even when digging clay to make bricks for Tuskegee's buildings. They failed several times before getting the clay and straw mixture right, nearly bankrupting Washington, but it proved the value of persistence. Washington pioneered in taking education to the people. Students printed bulletins that showed farmers new farming techniques. Then he had George Washington Carver put the bulletins and tools in a buggy to go out to demonstrate the new methods. This college on wheels spread around the country and around the world as visitors from Europe, Africa, China, India, and South America came to study. Though most Tuskegee graduates went home to teach, they had the opportunity to learn dozens of trades, along with farming operations and domestic skills also. Washington wanted everyone to be able to earn a living anywhere. He was a visionary. A decade before the U.S. National Chamber of Commerce was even proposed, he founded the National Negro Business League. Under his leadership, the League grew to 600 chapters within 15 years. And decades before the advent of 4-H clubs, he spoke and wrote of training the head, the hand, and the heart, and of keeping an orderly home. Despite this, envious blacks, mostly from elite northern schools, charged that Washington was training Negroes only for domestic service, though they knew this was untrue, for he always sought out the best black professionals he could find. For example, he recruited George Washington Carver to lead the agriculture department, and architect Robert Taylor came from MIT. He was MIT's first black graduate and graduated at or near the top of his class. Washington had students apply their technical classroom training to solving practical problems. This technique is called interdisciplinary training today, but to Dr. Washington it was simply common sense. Though economic independence was a priority for Washington, academic subjects were always a core part of the curriculum. He worked hard to prepare students for full integration by instructing them in such topics as cleanliness and table manners, even etiquette. He believed that being prepared, rather than agitating politically just then, would be more productive and safer for his people. Yet for himself, he openly opposed Jim Crow disfranchisement laws. He also led and financed 5 legal challenges to disfranchisement. One went all the way to the Supreme Court. He led and financed those challenges in secret, for secrecy and speaking carefully was often a condition of survival. Those were very dangerous times. A friend of Washington's, a fellow principal, was shotgunned to death simply for encouraging blacks to own land, something Washington openly and publicly exhorted blacks to do. Yet fully aware of the danger this posed to his own safety, he continued to stand out by speaking up. When Teddy Roosevelt summoned him to Washington to seek his advice, he had Washington stay for dinner at the White House. When word leaked out about who had come for dinner, whites, especially Southerners, were enraged, for this was a flagrant violation of the day's racial etiquette. Children even sang ditties about it. Within weeks, whites in Louisiana hired a black man to go to Tuskegee to assassinate Washington. But he was up north fundraising. He had to spend nearly half of each year doing that just to support Tuskegee's payroll. His efforts always were to benefit Tuskegee, not himself. Andrew Carnegie, one of his largest benefactors, once offered him $650,000 so that he need not worry about financial security in his later years. Washington politely refused, but Carnegie persisted until Booker agreed to accept the interest on the gift. Washington immediately rescinded his Tuskegee salary and continued to work there without pay for the rest of his life. There is, of course, much more to the life and lessons of Booker T. Washington. His Sunday evening talks with students, compiled in his book Character Building, exemplify the enduring relevance of his practical, character-driven philosophy. You will find these talks, along with several of his 14 books, speeches, and articles posted in their entirety on our website, for they remain every bit as relevant today as they were a century ago. Booker T. Washington's exemplary life is the inspiration behind the Society's mission to help young people become CEOs, that is, to take responsibility for their own character, education, and opportunity.